Unbroken, healing through storytelling.
Hello and welcome to Unbroken, Healing Through Storytelling, the podcast show with me, Madeleine Black, where I speak to people that have been through some tough times, but they've come through them and they're now making a difference for other people. And today, my guest is Allister Frost. Let me tell you a little bit about him before we chat. Allister has worked in IT all of his life and started his first business at just 17 years old. He is currently working with a few startups and mentoring their founders. He has worked for many corporates, both of us as a contractor and employee, most recently at Microsoft. And he's super proud to have worked with a talented team designing m-pesa, which is a successful microfinance platform used by millions, mainly in Africa, and considers this to be one of his greatest contributions so far. But that's really all about his business life, and we're not here to discuss that. So anyway, let me welcome you, Allister, to the show. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you, Madeleine. Yeah, thank you for having me.
You're welcome, nice to see you. So because my show is called Unbroken, the podcast, the first question that I ask all of my guests is, what does the word unbroken mean to you?
Yeah, I think the struggle that I had with the story that we're going to cover really would have broken me had I not had the kind of attitude that I have in general to life and all of the problems that you have. I kind of think it's a bit of a choice if you decide that you are broken and you see that there's no way out and you create that negative frame of mind around yourself. It's very easy to get sucked into that. And I think that's what breaks you. I don't think it's people that break you necessarily. You know, it's your handling of the situation and how you deal with those events and things that are thrown at you. So I certainly could have come out of this broken, and I could have said, I am broken, I can't recover. But I just don't have that mindset at all. So that's what it means to me. I mean, everyone's saying resilience and that kind of thing. That definitely comes to the forefront of my mind about being resilient. And, you know, the thing is to let it wash over you and, you know, don't make a thing out of these things, no matter how big they are. And things can get out of control very quickly, as you'll hear from my story. But don't let that define you when those events happen. So that's what it means for me, not to be broken is to have some control yourself and, you know, make a positive action out of the events.
So. Absolutely, it's a great definition. So can we go back to the start of your story when you felt that you were out of control or you know, things were happening to you that you weren't really agreeable to?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess that really starts back in 2016. I'd finished at Microsoft and decided I wanted to be more involved with startups. So I went into a partnership and we started mentoring startups, and I had an awful lot of people approach me with some amazing ideas. But things quickly got out of hand. Some of the people that approached me, I don't think were entirely genuine about what their actual business was, their history, their backstory. I met a lot of very interesting people in a short period. And actually, the demands for money came in pretty quickly. And then I had some death threats, which weren't related to money, but they were related to what I was doing at the time, which I'd never had before. And I kind of got curious about that. And I wanted to know why I'd been suddenly threatened and what it was that caused that. And it turned out later to be very simple. There was something going on in the past, and they were becoming paranoid that I was around because I happened to be, you know, working with these startups in a business center. And those particular guys involved there were just getting a bit paranoid. But that sort of paranoia, actually, I noticed, sort of brushes off. And I started thinking about what was going on and started thinking, well, is there something a bit more to this? You know, have I done something? Or, you know, have I upset someone? And, you know, it just seemed to sort of snowball from there. My business partner had a phone call from the police, he claims. And at the time he said, to them, I am committing suicide to save the lives of others.
Hang on, let's stop there a second. Your business partner told the police that you are going to commit suicide.
Yeah, he did. And the explanation we got basically was I'd sent an email which had a copy of a conversation from Facebook. Because I was being threatened and I had a young daughter, I said to that person, I will protect my daughter. And I actually meant it as a threat, actually. Not that I would harm him or anything like that. Just, you know, I have a daughter to protect here. But it was misquoted. And, you know, once that suicide ideation had been put into the minds of the police, they immediately forwarded that on to the hospital, who then started monitoring me. And they were sending people around to a house I had in Cambridge, which I wasn't at the time. I was with my partner at the time. And so I was watching them turn up on CCTV and see police and didn't know any of this had happened, you see, and was getting more, you know, worried about the situation. Think, why are all these people coming around my house? What is going on? Just couldn't really understand why I was suddenly being followed. And that obviously brings about paranoia, and and everyone thinks you're crazy if you say I'm being followed.
Mm-hmm.
But then I had friends telling me that they were being followed. So I was like, well, this is very strange. What is going on? So I tried to get down to my parents, actually. And they actually, my dad lives in Hastings. And I got arrested on the way down. What had happened was that all of these reports had come in about me. One saying that I was going to commit suicide. They then put an alert on their system for missing persons. And I got a text saying, you're a missing person. And I was like, what's this about? Why am I a missing person? And I'd phoned my mum, and we talked to the police and talked to my mum about what was going on. But they decided they wanted to arrest me, and they stopped me on the A12. I think it's the A13 actually, driving down, and basically put me under arrest on a section 136, which is basically to move you to a place of safety.
Yeah. So for people who don't know, it's under the Mental Health Act, isn't it? That you're either at risk to others or at harm to yourself.
Yeah. It's actually a police law, but it does apply to the Mental Health Act, but it's actually it's still classed as an arrest, which is, you know, unfortunate, because I've never had an arrest before, so I didn't want that. But aside from that, interestingly, when I first met the police, the first one said to me, he knew me. And I was like, I don't know this person. And he said, oh yeah, well, I arrested him 3 months before. And I was like, are you crazy? What the hell are you saying? And they searched my vehicle, and he said that I had weapons in the car. And again, this was misinformation. Someone had phoned in again and said that there were weapons in the car when there weren't. So that caused them to get very upset with me, and the armed response unit came, and I was sort of stood by the car for 3 hours. I've got the records from the police, and I was wondering what on earth is going on here, because I've never had this before. And I spoke to the ambulance when they came, and they just immediately said, we need to section you. And you will be taken to a nearby hospital.
And being sectioned means you're being detained against your will.
Yeah, basically I was involuntary. So they moved me from the 136, which I think is only about 24 to 72 hours. Mm-hmm. They moved me to something called a section 52A, I think, which is just a form to hold me. My family were informed, but my nearest relative wasn't identified. It was misidentified. And there were some problems with the records, because my dad was then swapped out for another Graham Frost who happened to live in Colchester. So they made a huge medical records mistake. That really is why he wasn't involved initially. They'd rung him up, but he wasn't followed up with what was going on. And someone had also inserted that I had a history of bipolar, which was not true. And so I spent some time in that unit. I was then moved to
And this is a psychiatric unit, isn't it?
Yeah,
within a hospital ground.
It's actually a 136 suite, which the police detain people in for about 72 hours max. Within about 25 hours, early morning the next day, I was moved to Peterborough. And again, I was greeted by a nurse who said she knew me and welcomed me back to Peterborough Hospital, the Cavell. And I was like, I don't know you, I've never met you. And she sort of laughed with the policeman about it and said, oh, he's escaped, he's back again. And then I was detained on a section 2, which are 28 days. And I was like panicking, because I had a previous friend who had been sort of sectioned, and I thought, oh God, this could go on for years. The average detention is actually 3 years. And it's near impossible to get out. And they carried on dealing with me until 2018, but they took a long time to actually work it out. But I didn't have a history of mental health. I didn't have a history of bipolar, but that's what was written in my notes. And that's what the staff kept on writing. it's a relapse of bipolar. We need to detain him for longer. So
And
I
I
had
guess,
multiple
I guess the
detentions.
more you protested, the more they thought that was a manifestation of your mental health.
Yeah, one of the things, the traits, I guess, is of any mental health, and I think especially the ones they accused me of, which were both bipolar and schizophrenia at points in my diagnosis, were lack of insight. And if you ever argue or try to say that you don't have these, then lack of insight was put down, and that you weren't dealing with your problem. You weren't dealing with the fact that you've had a lifelong bipolar disorder since you were 8 years old, which was never
So
true.
they thought you were just in denial.
Yeah, I was in
Yeah.
denial, and that contributed to my diagnosis. That's one of the major points. And there are several other points. You get pressure of speech, and you get various. But I talk like this. This would be class of pressure of speech, actually. There are lots of traits in the bipolar checklist that would diagnose many people. Being happy was one of them. They couldn't understand it. And yet I was supposed to be brought in as a suicidal. I'd never had any suicide ideation, so there was never any of that on my notes. And I was quite positive about the experience, which they couldn't understand. They thought that was delusional. But I knew I would get out, and I knew that I was right about what I'd been saying had been going on. And it was just a question of time.
And the whole time in hospital and then also care at home lasted for a long time, didn't it? 419 days?
Yeah, so from the 11th of December 2016, from when I was first arrested on the 136, through to my final letter, and this ends the period, 6th of February 2018, they spent 5 months not giving me any medication towards the end, to absolutely confirm that none of this was anything to do with mental illness or medication, which it was found not to be. And the sort of head psychiatrist actually spent a great deal of time, this is the head psychiatrist at the service for Cambridge, assessing all of the other units, because obviously they had to do a sort of forensic investigation of how this had happened, what had happened at each of the places and what had been said. And that's where they found a lot of it had just simply been made up, and things had been said which weren't true. A history of mental illness was one of the main contributing factors. Everyone believed I was relapsing. So that's how I got stuck.
And how did they treat you when you were in there? Did they give you treatment? Did they give you pills or ECT?
Absolutely.
Or?
Yeah, so the first time I was given medication was at the Cavell, and I was forced medication. I was then put on very strong antipsychotics. I've actually kept some of them because I didn't always take them if the way they force you, if they're not present, you could just take. And a lot of patients, unfortunately, do take them. I think in cases which makes them worse.
Yes.
So it's very difficult. But I was on a series of medications which were hugely problematic because they reduce your cognitive ability, which means you can't really protest as well. You're not as you can't think, you've got no cognition, you can't remember things.
Well, everything
So
makes you dopey, really, doesn't it?
It makes you dopey,
Yep.
yeah. And it was only when obviously the psychiatrist took me off medication to sort of prove his theory that I began giving the evidence I needed to have given, just to prove my backstory. Because when I said about that system for m-pesa, no one believed that. They said that's crazy. You worked on the system with people. They just didn't believe anything,
And how did you feel when you heard that the chief of psychiatry in Cambridgeshire backed you up?
Well, he backed me up in all of our meetings. I think he realised very quickly this was a misdiagnosis, and it was apologetic, and I felt very sort of happy, obviously dealing with him. Whereas obviously the other psychiatrists weren't saying that, so I wasn't so happy to engage with them because they kept on using things against me. Everything I said to them was used as another trait to prove I had schizophrenia or bipolar. Everything I said to him was believed, and he would look into it, and I would then follow up with evidence of documents or emails to show him.
But I imagine it must have been such a relief to have somebody on your side.
Yeah, I think there was a bit of pressure from my dad as well, who'd come up and spoke to him and said, look, you've got it wrong. He's never had a mental illness. You need to stop, just repeating what others have said. Look at his medical notes. Look at his GP notes. You'll find nothing. And that's when he's looked at it. Yeah.
I guess there is a chance of going through all of this, when you come out, it actually could affect your mental health. The trauma of what you went through could have an impact on you. How did it affect you when you finally got free of it all, the weight of it, of what you'd been through?
Well, it had always been a fight. It's like anything. It was a struggle, and it never stopped. until the end. So it just became a relief off my shoulders, I guess, that I didn't have to keep on saying I don't have bipolar. You know, I don't have to worry about them just turning up at my house, arresting me and locking me up again. And that had happened a few times, and I was really worried about that. I never have to worry about that again, they said. And they've never had contact with me again. I mean, they've sent that letter and they haven't followed up.
When you say they, you mean the psychiatric services?
The psychiatric services, yeah, the team that I dealt with. Once they realised it was a mistake and they wrote that letter, that was the end of contact. There wasn't any further interventions needed or anything like that. And
so no apologies, no compensation?
No, the letter, well, we can't discuss the compensation side, that's ongoing, but certainly just, I mean, there is time limits and things, but I'm not really after that now. I'm much happier not to sign anything and just tell people that, you know, just be careful. It might not be, I met many patients who I believe were also misdiagnosed, and I think a lot of people kind of might latch onto something to explain a lot of their problems away. And I just knew in myself, this wasn't bipolar, this wasn't schizophrenia. I know people with it, and it isn't that.
But you are now passionate about sharing your story publicly, aren't you? How was it? Because obviously you have an IT background. When you first shared your story, say like on LinkedIn, which is a professional kind of platform, and you're sharing this incredible journey.
I was advised not to.
Who advised you not to?
Oh, the doctors. They said, whatever you do, don't tell anyone, which was like a red flag to me. I was like, I'm telling everyone then. The police advised me not to tell everyone as well. Fear of further arrest, they said. And I said, well, I'll take the risk then. If someone wants to report me for what I'm telling people, that's absolutely fine. If you've got something, you know, that you don't like.
It seems one would be suspicious they're telling you not to share anything because they want to cover their own backs.
Possibly. There was an investigation. They had spent an awful lot of money. I mean, in total, they won't give me the full figures, but I worked it out. Over $500,000 in medical care and about 300,000 in a police investigation. Plus, there are other social services involved. So it's going on for £1 million to do what they did, and there's no accountability for it. And I have contacted the council, my MPs involved, just to say, you know, why is this money being spent without any due diligence on the simple fact I never had any mental illness. And obviously anyone can develop mental illness at any point, but that wasn't why I was being detained. I was being detained on a relapse. Yeah.
And now you've started your own group, a charity, haven't you, which is called
I call it Insight.
Insight, because now you do have insight. You always had insight. How is that going? What are you doing with that?
Well, I've just contacted people have been in touch with me the whole time. The journey, I've been obviously posting this since early sort of January 2017. I actually posted during my detentions as well, but that went on for we're fourth year now. So I gathered hundreds of people in terms of contacting me. I've had NHS whistleblowers, I've had patients, and they've repeatedly told me that this is a problem. This is 50,000 people being detained a year. And there can be up to 40% misdiagnosed in early stages of the diagnosis for bipolar and schizophrenia. And I think that is just like the elephant in the room, because I may be the only one telling people. That doesn't mean I'm the only one. And maybe I'm the only one on LinkedIn, possibly. There have been a couple of others and they've disappeared off LinkedIn, but I've stayed in contact with them.
And what was the response on LinkedIn? Because it is, you know, considered a professional platform where we don't bring personal stuff to. How was the support?
Well, it's business, isn't it? But I'm detained. I can't help startups. I can't write code. I can't help anyone. So I see it as being business. Yeah. I had an interruption to my business. People used to ask me, I worked on, you know, what are the risk factors in your business? What could happen? Sectioning wasn't a risk factor in my business.
I can't imagine that would be that. But I'm wondering when you... Yeah, but I'm wondering when you came out of all this, were you not really angry? You know, what kind of emotions were you feeling after going through this?
I'm not angry because I don't believe the staff, either it's a lack of training, it possibly could be a little bit like, you know, we've got him sort of thing. I did have a couple of jibes like that. There were references made to my lifestyle. There were references made to the car I drive, things like that. And that did seem to be a bit of it, but I don't think it was done maliciously. I think they honestly think that they're doing a good job for everyone. And they are, in the majority of cases, they absolutely are. Mm-hmm. But obviously they've got to treat everyone the same. And so you get the same sort of treatment as the other patients. And many patients would lie and say they're not going to commit suicide or whatever. Of course, they do that, unfortunately, and that does happen. So, I don't see that I can hold anger to them. I think other people who were involved, certainly the misinformation about my suicide, the note from my business partner, he had good intentions, and I had an apologetic letter about it. But I still can't sort of forgive certain bits just because my family were misled. Yeah. And when people absolutely knew I didn't have bipolar as a child, they told police that I did have bipolar as a child, knowing I didn't. That starts to, I'm upset about that, but I'm not angry. I'm just upset because, people have been misled. And I think it's a waste of police time. I think it's a waste of a hospital bed. And there are other people who are so desperate to get the medical attention and, psychiatric intervention they need, and their family beg the hospitals for. And I'm taking up space and money and resources. It's all paid for by the NHS. Hasn't cost me. I'm going to pay for this, remember. But it has impacted my business, and that's hence why I did put it on LinkedIn as well, just as a risk.
Well, it's good to hear that you got good support of it from LinkedIn. And what is the purpose of Insight, your charity that you've set up?
Well, I'd love to know if there's anyone else out there. I'm hoping there aren't. I'm hoping that people aren't misdiagnosed and detained, but I guess there are, and some people I know have. So I'd like to help them. I'd like to sort of, just give them like the knowledge they need to help themselves. I don't think you can actually get much support to get you out. I didn't have support from the advocates and to get me out, because their job is to obviously make sure you get the attention you need, and certainly not to get out. That isn't one thing that they do. So that's a little bit of a gap there in advocacy. And I don't think misdiagnosis is recognised by any of the people I spoke to. And it's very difficult with the lawyers. I did have a lawyer involved, but again, they wanted to keep me detained for my safety. So
it's a bit of a vicious circle then that you were caught in.
You can't get out. Yeah, you can't. I had tribunals, which I failed all my tribunals except for the last one. That was over to, well, the tribunal wasn't held. But you have the HM courts run the mental health tribunal service, and that's where they really decide, should this person be released after 28 days or not?
Mm-hmm. And you were let out after 28 days, or were you kept in for longer than that?
Well, overall, I was obviously kept in repeatedly, but yeah, each time it got to the 28 days, I was then let out, and then within 2 weeks, I was then resectioned, based on more information from other people, and again, my business partner the second time. So he got me sectioned twice. And
this went on for 419 days.
Yeah, I just on and off, and there was a big gap in between, and I'd moved out and moved locations, and it happened all again. And I called it a playbook because I honestly saw the same exact techniques used by the police to get me sectioned and by the medical staff to make sure I couldn't get out.
Yeah, I imagine people listening to this right now would be quite amazed, because I'm quite amazed that you're so kind of like quite laid back about it and quite accepting of it all, and really in a good place with it.
Yeah, it's 4 years.
So what was it that helped you to get over it or to accept it?
I think understanding that it isn't one person being malicious. People make mistakes. A collective of people can say things, and independently they can form a picture, but it's not the truth. It doesn't mean that that's you. What that means is they've got a tiny bit of information about you, and they're trying to help you the best of the way that they can. And unfortunately, people ring the police, and sometimes the police just don't have the time for this sort of stuff. They absolutely don't have the time to investigate backstories and evidence. They will arrest and detain you. That's it. And they'll process you. So
it's almost as if you're saying that you haven't taken it personally.
No, it's the system. Absolutely. This is not a personal... I am just one of many. I firmly believe out of those 50,000, there are possibly 500 people right now. And you've got to think the system's been run like this for 20 years. So there's many out there that were sectioned for 2 or 3 years who are then back in the community trying to get on. But sadly, I think many of them don't work again.
Yeah, the impact it must have on them. But you seem to have come out of it, unaffected, I guess. Unaffected, is that a word? That is a word. No. Obviously, you're saying now it's 4 years later. I imagine at the start it wasn't so easy, but you've come back and now you're determined to use this for the better, to serve other people, really, to bring awareness to this misdiagnosis.
I was told no one would believe me. That was one of the, I had lots of goads and lots of like, no one will ever believe your story. And, so what if you've been sectioned? And I just sort of treat that as a bit of a challenge. So I was just, I got to 4 million hits on LinkedIn and, just views. And I said, look, there's proof that people read this stuff. I've made many posts and I've posted lots of the evidence on there. The stuff I can release, the letters and things about, not having mental illness, just to kind of challenge people, because a lot of people obviously went with the diagnosis, and a lot of my network unfortunately went round saying, oh yeah, Allister's got bipolar. And I was like, that's not really fair, because I didn't have it, but that's continued.
Well, that's what I was thinking. If you did have it, how supportive is that to go around and tell everybody that you did have it?
Yeah, not very supportive. And I think also it does tell you a lot about what people think about mental illness. There is a stigma, and obviously, being labelled with something serious like bipolar, and probably worse with schizophrenia, actually. Because I noticed that bipolar wasn't really treated that I was a danger, but when I got labelled as a schizophrenic, I actually got banned from a couple of places. Because I was the dangerous schizophrenic who was a danger to others.
Yeah. And I had an aunt, sadly, who had schizophrenia, and she wasn't a danger to anyone. She never left her home. She was just drugged up, and she didn't really live her life. But hers was a different story, completely as a result of going through the camps, Auschwitz, the trauma.
God. Okay. Yeah. But that's the labelling system. I think it's some of the media have been, not very good with the labelling.
It speaks volumes about what we feel about people that generally do have mental health, though, doesn't it? And the stigma attached.
Had I had it, I would have been, I would have had a positive discrimination, actually, because,
Absolutely.
But I actually find once I got rid of the diagnosis, I didn't really have a leg to stand on in terms of any discrimination. I'm just your average, white male, 40-year-old, then. So, that's one of the difficulties with the Human Rights Act as well. There were 6 violations, but they're very hard to apply.
So what would you say is your greatest learning out of all of this experience?
Well, probably don't believe the professionals sometimes. I mean, I shouldn't say that maybe, but actually the psychiatrist said that it was a snowball. You've got to challenge. If you know in your heart that you don't have something, or you haven't done something, you have to fight for it. You have to say it isn't just being annoying and you're a trouble to them. Ultimately, I could have been in there another 3 years. They were going to convert it, I think, to a Section 3, which would have been probably 6 months rolling. Many people don't get out of detention. I had one guy in there 15 years. So it sort of, keep fighting, because, you need to prove. And we just had the post office scandal. I think of all those people that were wrongly, they've got, hopefully today we'll hear that they're overturned. But
for those that are listening right now that might not be in the UK, the post office scandal is about people that were given a new software system. Really, wasn't it? An IT system that was meant to assist them, but actually looked like they were stealing money and were wrongly imprisoned. Now they're appealing it and trying to clear their name. It's the most horrific case.
But hopefully their convictions will be overturned.
Absolutely.
And I've worked on similar software. I actually worked for Fujitsu at one point as well, not on that system, but I have worked in the industry, let's say. Computers make mistakes. People make mistakes. Computers, are programmed by people. That's what happens. So, I saw some similarities with that. And I just want to make sure that people, if anyone's listening to this who is trapped in the system, they need to find help. They need to, get people. And sometimes inside the system wasn't the right way. Sometimes you have to go outside. And believe in yourself, really. That's my message, I guess.
And where do you see the future now? What do you have planned?
Well, Insight is just the start of that's the first CIC that I've formed companies before, but that's a CIC, community interest, and I think there is something around that. I think there are many people who have been in my situation and are in my situation where I was a few years ago that I can help with, and the other advocates that I'm working with, the other patients who don't want this to happen. And so possibly that could help save some money for the NHS, save some lives. This is what it's about. I formed just a website. I did nhslives.com. That was a campaign about misdiagnosis. I only got a few thousand votes on it, but the messages have been really interesting about the people who have had relatives detained. And, you know, you spoke about your relative, and there are many people like that now, especially the ATUs, the autism treatment units that have been talked about with Alexis Quinn. And, you know, lots of people have been detained, both with mental illness, with disability, without disability. But it affects so many people. I just want more people to talk about it. And, you know, if I can do that via LinkedIn and Twitter, then great, you know.
Yeah, what is brilliant to see that despite going through this horrific time, really, where you must have felt so helpless, that you are still so strong and you're fighting it, and you remain positive and you look hopeful. So I think that is a brilliant message for people that are listening, that, yeah, things can be completely out of your control, but you can find a way through it.
Yeah, you can gain control, and you can fight, let's call it the system in this case, the mental health system. You can fight it. I don't think that should be held against you. That lack of insight, well, I was proved right in the end. I had insight. So, you know, it just took a long time. I wish it had been quicker. I was told that 2 years was, you know, the 419 days was just over a year was quick. I was lucky to get out within 3 years. So I see that as a positive. I was told, well, you could have been here 3 years. And I was like, well, I suppose so. Thank you very much. But I'd rather have not gone through the experience.
Absolutely.
But maybe by having the experience, I can help some other people and shorten their sentences, maybe. I don't know. I mean, help them, whatever I can do.
I believe that we can turn our pain into purpose, and it seems that's what you're doing now. So I think that's a really good place to end this interview here, that you have turned it into something better that will help other people, hopefully, that won't get trapped by the system as well. So thank you, Allister, for taking time out to speak to me today. It's been great.
Thank you, Madeline. Okay, have a good day.
You're welcome.
Unbroken, healing through storytelling.